I'm Bryan Bischof from Theory Ventures.
My name is Wiley. I'm co-founder and CEO at DOS.
When I hear like ERP and data platform, I'm thinking of the days when I was pulling all the data from NetSuite into our data warehouse. Is that the right mental model?
That's actually a perfect mental model in a lot of ways. And the reason we have the and data platform is because so often we go to businesses and they need a system of record for finance and accounting, operations, order management, inventory. And they also need a data platform like a Snowflake style, Databricks style data warehouse. And the ecosystems of the existing ERPs were not really ever designed to do that. And we've been able to give them like a first-class data platform experience that you're used to with a regular cloud services business. But in addition to that, they also want like a natively handled ERP. And so putting those two together has given us a ton of optionality as we sell the product and as we go to market in different industries.
When you think about sort of like, what are the applications of having it built into a data layer? What are the kind of questions that people want to ask and want to answer?
I think there's this really interesting set of behaviors that our customers exhibit once they recognize like a really fundamental truth, which is if I have a unified understanding of our, we call it master data, but it's basically, and the industry kind of calls it master data, but it's basically the what of my company, which is I have some products that I sell. I have SKUs, stock keeping units that I hold inventory of. I have organizations, customers I sell it to, vendors and people I buy from. If I know what all of those things are, and I can track transactions in the procurement side and as inventory flows in and inventory flows out and we sell it, and I can reference it all against the same thing, just like a normal data warehouse works, you can dimension everything. Once you can dimension everything, they realize quite quickly that they can track things from the place in which they begin to where they place in which they end, and they can close the loop in a way that they're normally not able to do.
Right.
So precisely the things you said around forecasting demand, forecasting supply, trying to be able to understand like the segmentation across the way that they sell something and the way that they buy something. A lot of brands don't have a fantastic understanding of how profitable they are by what channels they sell in simply because of this.
I remember, I forget what the name of the language is, but NetSuite has its own programming language. We had to like hire very expensive consultants. Does DOS have its own programming language?
We have a DSL, so like a domain specific language,
Yes.
but it's built on top of TypeScript.
Okay, okay.
So functionally, everything in the platform actually has to compile directly to real code, not a abstraction on an abstraction that is very far removed from an actual code base that looks and feels like a native language that you would write in normally.
Right.
And the rationale for that is that LLMs are good at writing TypeScript. They're not good at writing DOS script, unless we can proliferate the world of DOS script.
Right. You said LLMs. Wait, where are they at in this whole chaos?
Yeah, so I think that to take a step back, it's really important to understand like how do people buy and implement enterprise software broadly? Well, it's not like a PLG. Like you can't just like log on and say, I'm a NetSuite user and customer and I love it, right? Mm-hmm. So like, let's start there. There's a very long implementation process. We use LLMs to compress the implementation process down to the minimum viable amount of humans in the loop is the way I describe it. So humans are always going to be a bottleneck. We got to schedule on people's calendars. We got to get access to different things. We got to understand the shape and ontology of their business. But we don't want there to be a bottleneck in how we quickly can configure things, right. How we can integrate with third-party systems, yep. The ways that we map schemas and migrate data from legacy system A and legacy system B into DOS. Those are things that LLMs are phenomenal at. And so that's where we leverage them, is really compressing the time to value. What looks like something similar to like a Workato or I call it enterprise-grade Zapier, and we made it gray. And it allows you to bring third-party data in and dump it into the data warehouse, but apply structure and schema more so than just a regular data lake. And that's what customers really want, is they don't want to be re-engineering and re-envisioning like what does order management need to look like from an application point of view, which means we have to make some decisions for them in the actual schema inside of the data warehouse itself.
Yeah. Who is the sort of like implementation, like who's responsible for the implementation? Is it an implementation engineer? Oh, okay, so y'all are responsible for making this work for me.
That's right. Okay. And this was a super counterintuitive thing when we started the company. I think when we started the business, I had a very specific thing I said a lot, which was, I don't want to be a reformer. I want us to be able to go into companies and help them do things better, but I don't want to change their minds. We have really shifted to the exact opposite end of the spectrum because our customers, it turns out, don't want to do it. They actually, right. And I always thought, they want to have the control. They're going to want to build things themselves. And it turns out if we pull back one layer and we say, we will solve your problems for you to the specification that you give us, that's what they want. They don't want to be they don't want a new job. They don't want to be in DOS making and building widgets and workflows and concepts. They want to be like running their pasta sauce brand, which is one of our large customers, is like a top selling pasta sauce in Whole Foods. That's what they want. They want to be selling pasta sauce. They don't want to be building data warehousing connectors.
You want to put these LLMs in the system to try to use all the components that you have, and you want them to help do some of this very laborious connectivity work. Like, what was that adventure like?
We look at almost all of the systems engineering exercises like this as drawing concentric circles around a kernel of truth that we believe, which is that we think that the language models are very, very good at certain tasks, and there are deterministic things that you want to use a tool to do. And it's like, the tool calling and the tool, but it's basically, I don't want my LLM to think like it's a database. I want it to query a database. And so making that delineation, starting from that truth, is where we start to expand.
Let's enter the alpha zone. You have this idea where you want the agent to be like taking these actions, and they seem to be a little bit more complex. And so like, how did you get that agent to actually be successful at that task?
So the underlying pieces of the system need to be ergonomic for the agent.
Okay.
And it looks like just really good software engineering and software architecture. It doesn't look like AI engineering, context engineering, prompt engineering. It looks like, how do I build a set of distributed systems that can be called upon in a functional manner the way that a human would? And my analogy of, say, for the team of Tim Robbins or whatever, the actor in Shawshank, where he's digging out of the prison with a spoon. Don't build a spoon for the agent to use, build a jackhammer. And systems engineering is the jackhammering, not the how can we make the AI have a better prompt. It's about building architectures that they can grok the same way that a human has, the ability to grok better systems.
Okay, so then are you building tools for your agent to use across your system? How custom are those tools? Are they tools like you can write SQL, or are they very specific tools that we're starting to see in the industry?
Yeah, so the simpler you make your tools, the less of them that you have, the better the underlying systems engineering, the better the outcomes. And so just a really good example of this for us was we gave our model an agent loop. Basically, it's a while loop where it puts tasks onto the queue and it executes them, and then it'll replan itself. We only gave it like 3 tools. And we wanted to start with as minimum stuff as possible and figure out what it kept reaching for, but it didn't have. And the first one that came about was when we were realizing it had the ability to derive the schema just by looking at the tables themselves, not actually looking at the graph. We keep a graph-based representation of our schemas. It's much more compact than trying to like reverse engineer an entity diagram from SQL. It figured out how to do that anyways, and the recognition of, I think the realization that we had was that the language models are going to have so many emergent properties in their ability to understand complex systems. If you give them really good tools for understanding those complex systems, you want to start with a minimum set and grow outward, because you don't know necessarily what it's going to reach for. And when you set an insanely hard problem as an objective for it to execute, it'll break it down in a relatively logical and reasonable manner. And then there will be some of those tasks that are in there that are too difficult for it to actually pull off given the tools that it has. And that's where the roadmap really has to be steered, is what is the ceiling on the most complex thing that we want this thing to be able to do? For us, it looks like I want to be able to share my screen and have it join a call. And I walk it through an example of how we're doing an implementation for a customer, and then it can go and fan out and start doing implementation. Okay, so we could break that down into its atomic components that we would think about as if it were a human doing it, and then try to prompt our way to something that looks like the right plan, and then figure out what the underlying tools are that are needed for it to go and execute that. But you start with that minimum set and figure out where it falls down.
When you think about the future of agents in DOS in particular, do you think of them as part of workflows that run on a schedule? They do a thing that is sort of like a frequently needed thing to take place? Or do you think of them as like a synchronous experience that some user is interacting with the agent in this case? Which of these do you think is going to make the lion's share of the value moving forward?
The first part of your question is you have to do both of them. The second part of your question is where's the lion's share? It's definitely the asynchronous one, because each human being only has so many hours in a day to do things. You're doing other things, and if you can offload things to computers, just like we do with other stuff, you are going to be able to get a lot more value if I can say, hey, DOSBot, go into the void and figure this thing out, and then come back and notify me when you're done with it. Or maybe even don't notify me because I trust you, and go and figure out what other cross dependencies are and whether DOSBots need to be spawned to go and make this thing happen. Or I'm going to go and set up a workflow, or I'm going to have DOSBot set up a workflow if it needs to go in and do this indefinitely for the future. And I don't want to ever have to deal with this random purchase order that gets sent into our email inbox and it's not hooked up today.
Yeah.
The ability to offload things and create and take human labor and turn it into computable units, that's where all the value is, not the chat experience and the exchange of knowledge. Right. The exchange of knowledge is valuable, but the bulk of human labor being turned into something that is mechanically executable in a computer, that's where the revolution is going to happen.
When I was at Blue Bottle Coffee, we had some really deeply ingrained values around service. Yep. And we talked to all of the sort of operational partners about what does great look like. And so we really needed to codify that in some of these systems. Yep. So when we looked at operational efficiency, believe it or not, it was this sort of Pareto chart between, two axes around sort of providing value to the customer and not wasting money. Right. Not super shocking, but it was a really specialized metric. How do you deal with that all these companies are going to have their own ways of defining what good looks like operationally?
I should have given you a reference frame on the axes that we think about the platform on that make it unique. And so there's really three parts of the product that we characterize it as: composability, durability, and what we call agility. But it's really the ability to take in a new set of inputs into the business and rapidly adapt what it does. And if I talk about NetSuite in this context as a good example, you would say it actually is durable. You can't really break it. Now you can use it incorrectly and it can be frustrating and sometimes not to configure the way you want, but it's not going to show you the wrong numbers for your inventory. Composability is where almost all of these platforms fall down. Yeah. And that's the point you're talking about here. Right. Is we designed the product from the very beginning to be what looked like a set of Lego building blocks that we compile into what our customers need. Legos are very durable. When you step on them, it hurts and they're not going to break, right? Our product's the same way. You can't break our inventory management primitives, but you can restructure them to say, well, we use third-party warehouses and we use first-party warehouses and we have retail locations like Blue Bottle does. Yeah. And so compiling those all together for a customer based on their needs, that is the implementation process itself. Yeah.
It felt like there was a bit of a zeitgeist in the industry around 2020 where we were seeing a lot of demand forecasting stuff emerging and things of this type where we're going to take a little bit of ML and we're going to package it and we're going to make it so that everyone can achieve operational excellence through these new platforms and products. Does DOS build these sorts of ML products as well, or do you make it easy for other products to use these data? Where do you fit into this ecosystem?
We think of ourselves first and foremost as a systems engineering company. We think that AI being applied, let's call it categorically machine learning as a part of AI.
Yeah.
Something where we're statistically using pieces of data that we have or that's out in the market to make an assessment about what might happen. At the application layer, I'm not saying that we're not interested in that, but that's not what we're amazing at. And so there are plenty of platforms that are fantastic and finely tuned, not like a language model being finely tuned, but like well calibrated as businesses on delivering real value for, we do CPG, food and beverage forecasting. We have the best models for this in the world, and we will get it down to the case. That's not our job.
Yep.
Our job is to consume information that comes from those systems and to operationalize them for the business and create a control plane for you to execute through. And very systems engineering speak, right?
Nice.
But that's not the mindset that a lot of our customers have. And so that's what we're able to help them deliver on is they say, hey, I have a tool over here and a tool over here. How do I actually make this work for my business?
Okay, and then when is someone like ready for DOS? When are they ready to go beyond this like table stakes that you were talking about before?
There's like two real axes that I think about this on. It's your organization's total volume of pain. And I know that sounds brutal, but it's the truth. And when I talk to our customers about this, they all react the same way. They go, yep, that's right. It's how much pain is the organization enduring?
Yeah.
And what is the organization's capacity to take pain?
Yeah.
Because there are some companies that, not that they are, weak by any means, it's that the business can't be in pain because operationally the margins are so thin that they have to figure this out or else the business dies.
Yeah, absolutely.
A great example is the retail and grocery side folks we work with. Grocery businesses cannot make mistakes on inventory. If they make mistakes on inventory, they go out of business.
Yep.
And so that's a thing that they figure out very early in their journey. And so if they're in their journey in solving parts of pain that are, let's say, very high on that scale that we talked about, that's where we like to start to engage. So typically it ends up being businesses that are doing above 10 to $20 million in revenue, just because then you can't solve these things manually past that kind of point. The other axis that's really important to us is how highly dimensional is your company. So if you're a company where you're saying, yeah, we have a $500 million Amazon dropshipping business, I'm like, that's great, but we can't help you with anything because it's probably pretty like linear. And there's not situations where complexity is introduced in a manner that you have to think about n number of considerations in your point of sale, in your orders, in your inventory, in your procurement, in your finance org, even entity structures. That's where we get engaged, is when the dimensionality blows up a lot.
On the purely technical side, switching gears a little bit, when you think about sort of like what has enabled this to be like built, is this something that could have been built 10 years ago and people didn't realize all of the sharp edges yet, they hadn't yet simmered in the problem long enough, or have there been some fundamental breakthroughs that you're like, actually, now is the time?
Yeah, so when we started the company, I did not think that AI would get as good as it is this fast. I don't think anyone thought that. I don't think even Sam Altman thought that, right? And the people at OpenAI. When I started the company, my realization was that applications were easier to build than they ever had been as a result of basically cloud services, better open source technologies, the Cambrian explosion of high quality open source software, containerization, even as a basic concept, is I can package up an application and run it basically anywhere. And having a really deep understanding that our customers were being dramatically underserved and that they had experienced this very high amount of pain from incumbents for decades, and the sentiment was finally shifting. You're gonna have to go into your customers' organizations and deeply understand who they are and what they do and what they need. And it's not gonna look like what enterprise software sales has looked like over the last 10 or 15 years. It's gonna look more like partnerships that we saw a lot of in pre-Y2K internet companies.
Yeah.
Or software companies.
Yeah. And that's because they have to install the mainframes?
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly. We take the DOS mainframe and whoop, there we go.
Right.
But the representation of that I think that's really important is that because things are accelerating again, and I don't know if it's again, but it does feel like we get this acceleration that's much more similar to what happened in the internet era, is that the change is happening so fast that businesses that are stuck in like a previous way of doing things are all recognizing simultaneously, we need to dramatically transform our company and we need to find partners who can help us do that.
Yeah.
And we haven't had that in the last 20 years. And so that will be a big return to that modality of way that people work.
I see. Awesome. Where can people find out about working at DOS?
The best place to go is dos.com, and then find our careers page. It's just, I think it's jobs.dos.com. And then we have a technical blog of a few posts and stuff, talks like this. I think there's some supply chain podcasts that we're on every now and then. If you go and look on Spotify and look up DOS, we're the DOS that's not the musician DOS.
Okay. So if you want to work for the musician, we can't help you.
Right, I can't help you.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah.